So welcome everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today for this podcast, which is actually a joint communication effort between the African Union and the European Union. So we have started a bit of a joint communication campaign in March this year. And we have a very special year because we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the partnership between our two unions. And today we will be discussing a topic which I think is very high on the mind of audiences, of the public, both in Europe and in Africa, but also beyond. And I think also in terms of the minds of policymakers and politicians worldwide. And that is the topic of misinformation, disinformation, and information manipulation. We will get into, discussing those topics more in detail to make sure that we're all on the same page. But I just wanted to say from the outset is that we are here really talking about a global challenge for our democracies. So I'm Jakob Tam. I work here in a team in the European External Action Service that is really all about addressing foreign information manipulation, interference, including disinformation, but more from a sort of foreign policy perspective. And I have the big pleasure to have with me here today two very experienced, prominent people that are part of this global community fighting disinformation and misinformation. And that is Mr. Gibi Moses and Stefan Munges. But I will pass the floor directly to you to introduce yourselves.
I am Gibi Moses Korsuk from Africa, to be specific, South Sudan, Juba. I'm an African Union Media Fellow, and my area of specificity is fact-checking or fighting misinformation. Currently back home, I am the programs manager for a fact-checking organization called the Clarity Desk. Thank you.
My name is Stefan Müntges. I'm the coordinator of the European Fact-Checking Standards Network. We're the Association of European Fact-Checkers. Currently, we have 62 member organizations from 36 countries. So our conceptualization of Europe is wider than just the European Union. I've previously worked as a journalist for 12 years in broadcast journalism, and in academia, I managed the Research and Journalism Education Institute. And then I got into fact-checking.
Okay, thanks a lot for that. I just wanted to highlight two recent studies in that sense. One is the Public Perception Survey of the World Economic Forum Global Risks Perception Study, which actually rates information and disinformation as among the top short-term risks facing our societies today. There was also another study commissioned by UNESCO, I think this one back in 2023, we're asking citizens in 16 different countries across the world if they thought that disinformation and misinformation would impact decisions on elections in their respective country. And there you have 87% that actually responded yes to that question. I mean, just to make sure that we're on the same page here from the outset when we speak about this topic, because it is a topic that have many, many names. And I think, different things come to different people's minds when we think about it. I mean, we talk about fake news, propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, foreign information manipulation. I think there are many different words that are being used. So could I just ask you if we can first just define what is actually misinformation and how that differs from disinformation?
Yes. I'll start with the disinformation. Disinformation, this is false information deliberately created and spread to deceive, mislead, or manipulate a person or group of people for malicious or deceptive purposes. This misinformation now, this is information which is somebody shares without knowing that it is wrong information, but it is wrong information. And then there's also another one that we have not mentioned about. It's called malinformation. Malinformation is right information which is let out or spread with intention of causing harm. I know that this information is wrong, but because I want to hurt you, then I let it out or I spread it out. So the two, mainly the misinformation and the disinformation, can start with the misinformation, then somebody turns it into a disinformation. Or it can start with a disinformation, then someone, because he doesn't know that is the wrong information, he will spread unknowingly or unwittingly.
I think GB Moses made the point quite succinctly. The main difference between misinformation and disinformation is the intent. With disinformation, the intent to cause public harm. It's a bit tricky because in Europe, we sometimes use the term also more broadly. For example, we have what's called the Code of Conduct on Disinformation in Europe, which is like a big code which is signed by various stakeholders, including big technology companies. And this code conceptualizes disinformation more broadly. It also encompasses foreign information manipulation and interference under this umbrella. And it also encompasses influence operations, so the use of inauthentic engagement, inauthentic accounts, bots, sock puppets, the likes, basically anything to covertly manipulate public opinion. So this is sort of the broader interpretation of the term. We can discuss what makes more sense in what circumstance.
Okay, so thank you for that. I think much clearer now what we're talking about when we say misinformation and disinformation. I would just like to add one thing on that, and that is another term which we refer to as information manipulation and interference. Because what I think is quite clear is that when we speak about, disinformation and misinformation, we're essentially talking about content and narratives, right? But what it doesn't tell us so much is the how behind placing that content and those narratives in the information space. And it doesn't tell us so much about the who. I mean, who is actually behind placing those narratives in the information space. So from the side of the European External Action Service, we have been trying to push the agenda a bit forward there. And we speak about foreign information manipulation interference, but you could make that domestic information manipulation interference as well. I think the point here is really to try to move beyond content to behavior. Because what we need to distinguish here, which I think is a very important point, is between genuine opinions and those fabricated artificial opinions created by your troll farms and the bots and what have you. Because here we are looking at a clear manipulation and interference in our information space. And when we speak about freedom of expression, we need to make sure that we protect freedom of expression and that we protect the integrity of our information space from this type of manipulation and interference coming from some actors.
Sure. I mean, as you pointed out, it's not about opinions. Everybody can have his or her opinions, whatever they like. I'm not going to tell anybody not to have an opinion on anything. What is important, though, is that when we discuss our opinions and differences of opinion, that we do so in a shared reality, because otherwise the whole exercise becomes sort of futile, right? So you need a shared reality to discuss differences, to come to agreements, to make compromises, or just to acknowledge that you disagree with someone. And that's the point in fact checking. It's this construction, or it's providing a shared reality, a shared set of facts, which everybody can acknowledge and on which everybody can form his or her opinion. Give you a very simple example, because I often get asked, like, what is actually, isn't everything an opinion? Like, is fact checking not nonsense? No, it's not, because it's very, very simple example. The sentence, I am 38 years old, is a factual statement that can be proven false or correct. You can look at evidence. You can look at my passport. You can look at my birth certificate. You can ask eyewitnesses that were there when I was born, and they can say, yes, I was born 38 years ago. But the sentence, I am a young man, now that's my opinion. I hope everybody agrees with my opinion, but I know certainly my kids don't agree with that. So that's, in essence, is a good way to explore the differences of a factual statement, and an opinion.
Fact checking, on another hand, also helps in political accountability. As leaders make promises, either for the next 4 or 5 years, but then as time goes on, they don't fulfill their promises. So as fact checkers, we come out and we fact check their content or whatever the promises they made 2 years back or 3 years back. You promised us what the first 100 days you're going to do this. It's now 200 days. You've not done anything.
Okay, fantastic. All right, that's very interesting. So, GB Moses and Stefan, I mean, you work in quite different contexts, although with similar sort of roles, so to speak. So I was wondering, I mean, if you could, perhaps starting with you, GB Moses, give us a little bit of color, a little bit of reality of what a sort of a fact checker's life is like in your part of the world.
It's a bit tricky, but from this side of the world, misinformation mostly spreads through online platforms, basically Facebook, WhatsApp, TikTok, and those are the main one. Yeah, even X. So as a fact checker, what we do is we have to make sure we monitor the social media and then even the mainstream media, because most of the mainstream medias these days have online presence, and that's where misinformation spreads so fast. So we monitor, and when we identify a fact check or a claim that we think needed to be fact checked, we try to look for the facts. If there are real facts that can help us debunk it, then we will debunk it and publish it on our website. The one I work for is the Clarity Desk. However, there is limited reach of debunks in the long run. So what we do also, we go out and try to create awareness among the population. We do online trainings and sometimes in-person trainings. And if there are resources, we go to radio stations as well and create that awareness in that, even if in areas where we are not there, because in Africa, we are fact checkers are few with limited resources, its reach and access is very hard. So whichever opportunity that we get, we make sure we make people aware about the presence of misinformation and disinformation and how they can personally tackle them and reduce its spread.
Thanks a lot for that, Stefan. I wonder, here we had a little bit of an explanation from GB Moses on sort of the day-to-day realities of his work as a fact checking. I mean, does this sort of resonate with you and your work in a more of a European context, and in charge as well of this quite wide pan-European network of fact checkers?
Yeah, there's definitely a couple of things that resonate, but I think there's also some significant differences. So in Europe, we have fairly big organizations that do this work or have been doing this work for quite some years now. But it also varies depending on what region in Europe we're talking about. For example, GB Moses mentioned that sometimes editorial or mainstream media is also a vector for spreading misinformation. That's in some parts of Europe an issue, in others it's not. In other parts of Europe, think especially Scandinavian countries, Nordic countries. I'm from Germany, so it's similar in Germany, that it's mostly misinformation is an online phenomenon that happens on big social media platforms, for example. In other countries where, for example, big public media companies have been captured by cronies of regimes, by oligarchs, like the situation is different, and their mainstream media has to be fact checked as well. And what we're also doing, or what our community also is doing quite substantially, is media literacy work, like GB Moses explained, that he and his team is doing in Africa. So going to people, talking with people about the value of good and trustworthy information. What's also a big part of the work of fact checkers in European circumstances is the work on technological solutions. So we have several member organizations that work on providing tech solutions, monitoring software, etc., to fact checkers to survey and monitor information spaces. And what's also, I think, is quite different from most other parts of the world in Europe is that we, as a fact-checking community, do a lot of advocacy towards the European Union. So there's a strong digital rulebook in the EU, and we try to provide our insights and our expertise to inform the implementation of this rule book. So we hold platforms, we hold national governments to account so that freedom of speech and the fight against misinformation are properly valued.
Thank you. About the part on advocacy, you were speaking, Stefan, advocacy in relation to EU institutions, the legal frameworks and all of that. I know that GB Moses, you have also been engaging in cooperation with the African Union, and you have developed this toolkit. I was wondering if you could just briefly, in a few sentences, tell the audience what that toolkit is about, because it sounds very relevant indeed.
We were two, as you can see. We produced two. So my idea was about the election fact checking. Then my colleague's idea was about civic tech, because as I said earlier on, we see misinformation spreads much through online platforms or through technology. So to counter it, at least we need some kind of technology or tools. So then we bring in the element of the media literacy. So we collected all the tools that we see are very necessary in elections or in fighting misinformation during elections, beginning with the definition of what is election misinformation. What is the harm, the dangers, why should people be able to avoid it or to identify it? Yes, given the African Union as being the African house to house us, individually it was very hard for us to make our voice reach some more people. So when we got the opportunity at the African Union as media fellows, we had to bring this tool in and to spread it, we had to develop the tool so that it can reach a lot of people. Secondly, in Africa, there's also Africa Facts Network. We reached out to them for some expertise or some knowledge in developing this tool. And when it was developed, African Union helped us in spreading it. We also sent some copies to them, to the African Facts Network, so that it can reach a lot of people.
Okay, thanks a lot. Already, a takeaway for me in this discussion is that a fact-checking organization, a platform, a network is actually a lot beyond fact-checking as such. So I think what we heard from both of you is that certainly fact-checking misinformation, disinformation online or offline, but that's only part of the work. You are also engaging in public awareness raising, and I think what you just explained there, GB Moses, is an example of the type of assistance, of help you provide to the public as well to do their job and they take their responsibility in terms of the consumption of information, providing tools and this type of guidance. And then also, I think, Stefan, the more political work and the policy work of advocacy and so on. If we can just, slightly shift to another question, I think it's fair to say that, the fact-checking community is really on the front lines against disinformation and misinformation. And we know that the front lines can be quite a challenging place to be. So again, from your sort of personal experience and also what you hear from your colleagues in the field, from your partners in the fact-checking networking community, if you could give the audience a little bit of a sense of what you see as the main challenges facing the fact-checking community today. Perhaps I can start with you there, Stefan.
Sure. So, where to start? So we're facing several challenges. Most substantially, I think, is the democratic backsliding that we see in several countries that goes hand in hand with the repression of free press, of freedom of speech. We have, for example, member organizations in Georgia, which are seeing a crackdown by increasingly authoritarian government. They are literally being prosecuted for doing fact checking, which is quite worrying to us. We have seen other cases in which fact checkers get harassed, get attacked. One of our member organizations from Serbia, their offices were raided by police under false pretenses. So this sort of really full force state sanctioned repression, that's a big worry. We also see there's increasingly attempts to delegitimize fact-checking and journalism. The Russian state propagandists have started delegitimizing fact-checking by imitating some of the instruments of our community, which is a bit subversive. But we also see that the most important players in the information ecosystem, namely big technology platforms, are retreating from the fight against misinformation.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, if I can add on Stephen's ideas, we also look at, beginning from the platforms, we also look at YouTube has been giving the IFCN some funds to fight misinformation. Mid this year, they withdrew and they said there were some funds which were still in for use, but they said you can do anything with the money, but make sure you don't mention us. So it looks like everybody is running away from fact checkers, abandoning fact checkers, making us look as if we are bad, we are doing something bad. And then secondly, another challenge is that the misinformers, the one we are fighting, being on the front line, they are more resourced than us, beginning from human resource, even monetarily. They have a very big network. And technology-wise, even these tools that we are talking about, we always come to counter what they use. So they move ahead of the fact checkers. So that's a very big challenge. By the time we come in to correct it, they've already moved on. So as a fact checkers, it's really a very big challenge for us. And it's worse from this other part of the world where technology and internet itself is still a big problem. And also on adding on the platforms, especially Meta, if you look at how the algorithm works, the speed at which misinformation moves and the speed at which fact checks moves is very different. And they're the ones who have the control. And here we are the ones, we are also coming, trying to look for funds from them or asking for funds from them. They decide what to do with the information, play around with the information. So since at this moment they're not on our side, of course, even if however much we fact check, our fact check will not have very big reach compared to how the misinformation itself is spreading.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, challenging situation. I mean, if I hear you correctly, I mean, we're talking about challenges from various fronts, so to speak. I mean, starting from the context in which you are working, the politics of it, the financial aspects of it, but then also in terms of how the sources and the actors behind disinformation are changing, and that you're many times up to against quite a massively resourced adversary, so to speak. I think you both mentioned that. So, my sort of next set of questions would be a little bit on the future in terms of fact checking and the way forward. Because, of course, if we consider that, like we saw in this World Economic Forum perception survey that rated, misinformation and disinformation among the top short term threats facing us, that we're looking really at attacks against our democracies globally. You mentioned, Stefan, democratic backsliding in a number of contexts. And we're really, talking about quite a well-funded, massive sort of disinformation machine out there, if you want. My question then would be, is fact checking enough? Or do we risk sort of falling into a type of sort of whack-a-mole game, so to speak, when we go chase out misleading or faulty narratives about things? I'm asking you, with your experience, to see what is the future of the fact-checking movement, what measures, what responses need to be there, perhaps also beyond fact-checking, to start to address this global challenge to democracy. I don't know, maybe I'll start with you this time, GB Moses, how you see it from your perspective.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think the first thing should be the governments giving not only fact checkers, but all the media personnel or media houses their freedom and the protection that they need as journalists or as media professionals. Because one point where misinformation spreads is because there's that information gap. The journalists are censored, others are arrested. The information that comes out satisfies the needs of the governments in power. But then if people are given, if journalists especially are given their freedom to write things as they are, the public will be able to consume information which is correct. And then here, fact checkers will also come, fact check everything without any fear of being arrested. And then we will not encourage governments to fund fact checkers as such, because it will jeopardize their transparency, or they will work towards the interest of the governments. But they should also be in the picture, because given an example, the toolkit that we produced, if I did it individually, like I personally, nobody would take it serious. But the fact that it was supported by African Union and the EU, it looks important. So the governments and institutions like the EU and the AU should come around and support the fact checkers.
Okay, thanks a lot. So, more international governmental support for fact checkers. I think your message there is clear, GB Moses. Stefan, how do you see the direction of travel of the European fact checking community? What should be the main priorities ahead?
Well, when we talk about countering mis and disinformation, we shouldn't talk about an either or question, because it's not either fact checking or media literacy. It's not either regulation or more quality journalism. It's all of these things. It's a huge problem which needs to be tackled from all sides. And I think fact checking provides a substantial part of the toolkit to counter it. Just to give you one data point, people see things online and they wonder, is this right? Is this true or not? And they were asked in a very big survey by the Reuters Institute that does the digital news report every year. And they asked people, what do you do? Where do you turn to when you think something might be false or misleading online? And 23% of European respondents said they turn to a fact-checking website, because there are a lot of people out there that want to have accurate information because they understand people aren't dumb. They understand that bad information leads to bad decision, leads to damages for them. Think about simple things. Vaccine misinformation. You can be skeptic as much as you want. If your kid contracts measles and has complications and suffers from that disease significantly, you'll understand that, yeah, maybe you should have listened to better information and vaccinated your kids. So there is an inherent value to trustworthy, reliable information. And I see increasingly that also industry in Europe is seeing the value in that. Good quality journalism, a healthy information ecosystem, is the foundation for economic prosperity. And I think this is something that the institutions, be it in the African Union or the European Union, need to understand. This is not just about democracy. This is about the foundations of our societies. There's a funny story about the two young fish that swim across the water, and they run into an older fish, and the older fish asks the two young fish, "Hey boys, how's the water today?" And they swim past him and go like, "What's water?" Because you don't recognize what you have as long as you're immersed in it. And it's the same with democracy. As long as you have it, and as long as it's working and you're living a fine life, you don't understand and recognize the value of democracy. But once it's gone, and once the foundation for our economic prosperity is gone, that's when people start realizing. And I think we're at this point where people start seeing the negative, very damaging effects of mis and disinformation. And so what we as a European fact-checking community are doing is we're trying to scale the impact of our work, reach more people, and also provide data. This is, I think, an important point when we talk about fact-checking. Fact-checkers produce some of the most valuable data on the internet because they can, with a very methodological process and very strict standards, fact-checkers can determine whether a claim is correct or inaccurate or misleading. And that produces structured data about content on the internet that's very valuable for a lot of stakeholders. And I think we need to tell people more about the value of this data we can provide, the way it can be introduced in automated systems. Think of generative AI, systems that need good quality data to provide outputs that are usable for people. Generative AI, it's going to run into barricades if it keeps hallucinating. It's not going to be largely applicable in, for example, business context if you cannot trust what the AI tells you. So I think that's a very important path forward for the fact-checking community. And we're going to keep providing good information. We're going to keep holding governments, keep holding platforms to account, because, I mean, what's the alternative? Do nothing and look everything go down the drain? That's not what I like to do.
Hey, thanks for that. I mean, I think those were really strong points. I mean, it's clear from this discussion that fact checkers, the fact checking community, provide a really essential service to our democracy, and that is helping our citizens access reliable information. And without that information, citizens cannot take, the decisions they need to improve their lives and improve the societies they're living in. And as such, it becomes a little bit the live stream of our democracies. But I think, another really important point I think you both made there is that, of course, there is no one silver bullet to resolve, magically this global massive phenomena, which is disinformation and misinformation, information manipulation. I know you discussed a little bit the concept earlier on as well. But we can only move forward if we work together and if we do so in a comprehensive way between governments, civil society, international organizations. And I think that is very much, the sort of whole of society type of approach is really the only way to go here. And I think, from the side of the European Union, this is really the spirit and the logic of this sort of FIMI toolbox that we have been working on, which is raising public awareness, having a proper understanding of what the situation looks like, building our resilience, to disinformation and misinformation, by support to from the educational sector, media literacy, to the fact-checking community, independent journalism, but also making sure that, as a third point, that we have the proper sort of government policies and regulations in place to be able to ensure the protection of our information integrity. And then, as a fourth line there of action for the EU side as well, is to work with our international partners across the world in terms of addressing this. It's been a really interesting discussion. I wanted to finish off by asking you one final thing. And that's really for our audience as well. I mean, I have the luxury of sitting here with two experts with very prominent experience in fact checking. But I would like to ask you if you could give perhaps your sort of, top three, say, your top recommendations, tricks, tips to the audience in terms of how they can themselves navigate this very complex information space today, how they themselves can do that, fact checking that you do for a living. So I don't know if we can start with you, GB Moses. What are your top suggestions, recommendations for our audience in terms of fact checking the content and navigating this information space?
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. Mostly during my trainings, I always tell my trainees that with the fact checking, the first tool is critical thinking. So we should always be skeptical about everything that we read or everything that we find online. So we have to question, first of all, we question the source. And if you found the source is right, then you question the claim in like itself. So you don't have to take anything or everything on face value, wherever it's coming from. So that's the first tool that everybody should be equipped with, whether you're a local person or a post holder, whatever status you're having in, you should have that at your fingertips. Then secondly, you don't hear news from one source, or even if it's your favorite and you take it for like the right one, you have to verify with the other sources and find out that it's right or not. And then lastly, you also have to make sure you get into contact with the fact checkers. If you cannot do it on yourself, reach out to expert and get help. But you should never consume information without knowing whether it's the rightful one or not. It becomes worse when you go ahead to share it, because when you share, it's not only ending with you, but you're sharing with the community that consume your information or within your network. Yeah, thanks.
Super. I mean, either do it yourself through applying a critical mind, critical thinking, or if not, you ask people that know about this, such as the fact-checking community. I was wondering, Stefan, what are your sort of top suggestions for our listeners?
I think GB Moses mentioned the most important ones. I think if you are unsure of a claim, whether it's true or not, look for an IFCN or EFCSN certified fact checker. Many of them also have WhatsApp tip lines, so you can send them a WhatsApp and ask whether a claim is true or not, and you can get a response quite quickly. Think about the sources you consume. So look at what media you're looking at, which standards do they abide by? Can you actually know what the source is? That's often like a bit murky on social media. Be wary of anything that tries to elicit strong emotional reactions from your side. And if you ever want to feel better about the world, get off social media. That's the most helpful thing.
All right, thanks a lot. So we will also put those the links of those different platforms, organizations that Stefan just mentioned, so you can access it yourself. And hey, I mean, that's it for today. Thanks so much for taking the time. It was super interesting for me. And I'm quite sure that very rewarding and useful for our listeners as well across the world. So a big thank you from the side of the EU and the African Union for taking part in this joint effort to tackling misinformation, disinformation, and, well, information manipulation. Thanks a lot.